Welcome everyone to another video of discussion of free answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. In this month we are doing GS1. Today we are going to do GS1 Society. Specifically topics that we are going to look for is role of women, women's organization, population and associated issues, poverty and developmental issues, urbanization and their problems and their remedies. We are going to see two questions from these topics and one question from current affair. Let us see the overview of those questions. The very first question is about poverty, and we will be delving into the nature of poverty, which is not just limited to economic inadequacy but also encompasses social and political exclusion. The second question is with respect to interlinkages of population growth and poverty scenario in India. You have seen in previous year questions of UPSC CSE mains, there are certain questions where there are higher demand with respect to interlinkages of multiple topics of various GS syllabus aspects. So we are going to see this question from that perspective. The third question is current affair based question. We have seen rise in hiring of consultancy firms by government to solve problems, but there are certain kind of benefits as well as challenges associated with the same. So we will be looking at those dimensions and aspect in question number 3. Let us start with question number 1. Let's read the question number 1 together. Poverty is not merely a state of economic inadequacy, but also encompasses social and political exclusion. Substantiate. Now, this is a very straightforward question. In the introduction, you have the opportunity to define. In the body, you have two headings. In the first heading, you can talk about that how there is social exclusion which is leading to poverty. Then in the heading 2, you can talk about how political exclusion is leading to poverty. And in the conclusion, you have the opportunity to talk about way ahead what are the kind of measures that can be taken to ensure that social inclusion as well as political inclusion is there, so such that the poverty is eliminated in India. So this is something as a structure for this answer. Let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you have the opportunity to define. You can define poverty as lack of access of basic necessities which can realize dignified life. So that is something for the definition. Apart from definition, you can also talk about that how poverty is not just about economic aspects but also encompasses different social and political aspects. You can talk about over here multi-dimensional poverty. Over here you can talk about various parameters with respect to multidimensional poverty. You can also cite data points. You can talk about that how in 2019-21 total number of poverty headcount is 14.96%. Now this is again with respect to multidimensional poverty. So with this you can finish your introduction and move to the body aspect. In the body, in the heading 1, we will be start with the heading social exclusion leading to poverty. Over here you can list various proof points where we can talk about that how social exclusion is impacting the poverty scenario in the country. Firstly, you can talk about limited access to opportunities. We do understand that there are various opportunities, but because of social exclusion there is an element of discrimination. You can list down different pillars such as education, healthcare and basic infrastructure. In education, we are looking at certain kind of discrimination. We have seen there is higher degree of gender discrimination. Apart from gender, we have also seen how there is element of class, caste, etc., even religion. This kind of social indicators are used and specifically for the purpose of discrimination, they leads to poverty. For basic infrastructure, we have seen that how there is proliferation of slums which do not have access to the basic needs such as water and food. Next is stigmatization. We have seen that how certain groups are stigmatized and discriminated. They are not given access to the opportunities such as employment. We have seen there is pink collarization with respect to gender discrimination. Apart from that, there is also element of marginalization of vulnerable group. Now we have seen certain discrimination such as discrimination based on religious identity, this kind of social exclusion also impacts people's access to opportunity as well as their direct impact with respect to poverty. In the heading 2, you can talk about how political exclusion leads to poverty. As we have seen that there are certain factors such as limited political participation that is part of political exclusion. Think about from two perspectives, as voters perspective and as candidates perspective. From voters perspective, we do understand that how lack of access of basic needs also kind of proves hurdle to access the political rights. Over here we are talking about accessing political identity, where we do understand that people who do not have access to proper housing, they also face hurdles with respect to getting proper identification, and that identification limits their participation. Apart from that, we have also seen that how there are certain kind of undemocratic structure within the political parties where people generally have certain kind of monetary exchange for the political seats. That is again kind of political exclusion for the people who do not have that kind of privilege. Next is policy decision impact. When those people do not have access to the policy making framework as well as policy making system, they do not have proper understanding of the issues with respect to the population of poverty. Now that directly impacts how they participate in the policy decision making. The second is limited access to information and decision making. Again, with respect to information, they do not have the medium, such as they do not have access to digital tools. Now those kind of limitation can also impact political exclusion. And next is vicious cycle of powerlessness, as they do not have the kind of access to information, access with respect to policy decision making. They do not have say in the process, and that cycle continues, and because of that this leads to poverty. So this is how you can frame your heading 2's points. In the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead, that how going ahead the policy should be holistic in its nature, thus also encompasses social and political inclusion along with economic empowerment to eliminate the poverty. There should be social safety nets such as universal basic income so that people do not fall in the poverty trap. The next is political empowerment with respect to making sure that their political identity are realized, as in they can access their voting privileges as well as they can stand for their own groups. So that is something: political empowerment, social safety nets and holistic policy approach. So this is all for question number 1. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can define poverty, you can talk about how it is multidimensional in nature, and you can also give data point with respect to what is the present number of poverty headcount in India. The second is social factors, as in social exclusion leading to poverty. You give the proof point along with the substantiation. The next is political exclusion leading to poverty. Again, you can give the proof point along with the substantiation. And lastly, you can talk about certain measures that can be encompassed to ensure that poverty is eliminated in its multidimensional nature. So that is something for question number 1. Let's move to question number 2. Let's read the question number 2 together. India surpasses China to become the most populous country in the world. In this context, examine the impact of rapid population growth on poverty scenarios in India. What are the potential solutions to address these challenges? Now, in this question, if you understand, there are two major demands. Firstly, we have to talk about impact of rapid population growth on poverty scenario, and the second is with respect to the potential solution to address this challenge. When you're looking at this type of question where there is a statement in the introduction, you can use that statement and give the context and expand the idea. In this question, you can talk about that how recently India surpassed China and became the most populous nation, and by 2050, India can see a potential of 1.6 billion population. Now, this is something kind of a hurdle for policymakers, as India is also a country with higher poverty count. We can see that kind of numbers over here. For rural, we have almost 20%, and for urban, it's 5%. Overall, in the last question, we saw that poverty count is almost 15%, and this is multi-dimensional poverty we are talking about. So, we already have a higher number of poverty count, and when we are looking at rapid population growth, we are also looking at certain kind of challenges with respect to the same. So in the body, in the heading 1, you can talk about that how population growth is contributing to the poverty in India. Firstly, you can talk about that how population growth will put a lot of strain on the resources. We do understand that India is resource rich country, but when we think about per capita resources, we still fall back when we compare to certain neighboring countries. Second is unemployment scenario. Now, number of jobs are not growing on par with the population count. Jobs not growing on par with the population count, and that mismatch can raise the issue of unemployment. The third point we are talking about is environmental degradation. Over here, we are looking at higher strain on the ecological carrying capacity of the system, where population growth will definitely put a lot of pressure on the environment and the resources. Now that is going to impacting the environment directly. The fourth over here is pressure on infrastructure. We already understand that India faces present challenges with respect to infrastructure inclusion. Population growth again will augment the problem of infrastructural inclusion. Next is higher population below poverty line. As we understand that already 15% of the population in the nation is below poverty line, and that kind of number already impact how the further population growth can augment the poverty scenario in India. And lastly, we have seen that how there is divide between rural and urban places, where 20% of rural population is poor compared to 5% of urban places. Now we have to also understand that population growth is also visible higher in the rural settings. Thereby, there is a higher chance of incidence of poverty in rural scenario. So that is something for heading 1 for this body. In heading 2 of the question, you have the potential to write about solutions to address these challenges. The first point, you can talk about population control. Over here, you can give example of how national family welfare programs are there with respect to promotion of family planning and reproductive health of women. The next is with respect to employment generation. We do understand that the population growth has to be on par with the job growth, and therefore there must be enough employment generation to ensure that the excess of population is able to get the access with respect to opportunities. We can talk about that how Manrega, which is for rural, can also be there for urban places. The third is improved healthcare infrastructure. We do understand that there is higher correlation with respect to poverty and healthcare, as healthcare takes away lot of out-of-pocket expenditure, and that kind of out-of-pocket expenditure impacts their access to basic needs as well. So therefore, healthcare infrastructure should be augmented. We are talking about giving insurance, making sure they have primary healthcare at ease. The next is social protection. Over here, we are talking about education, healthcare, sanitation, etc. You can cite universal basic income as well for this kind of points. And lastly is investment in education and skill development. We do understand that if we want to make sure that the population growth is translated into quality human resource, we have to ensure investment in education and skill development. So these are the kind of solution that you can write for this heading. In the conclusion, you can talk about way ahead, as in policy framing must ensure that there is a balance of both family planning with respect to making sure that the rapid population growth is not unsustainable in nature, as well as we have to ensure that the poverty scenario is also not augmenting, where we are talking about ensuring certain social protection. Next, you can talk about that how there is need for holistic development. Instead of focusing on just one or two elements, we have to ensure that every aspect of the human development indicator are addressed. And lastly, you can talk about that you can also consider the SDG goals to ensure that holistic development is realized, and along with sustainable development. So that is all for question number 2. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can talk about the recent context, you can cite numbers, you can also give certain correlation with poverty to transition. The next, you can talk about that how there is certain kind of relation between the population and poverty and what is the impact of the same. In the next, you can talk about the solution, you can give the list of solution along with the substantiation, and in last, you can talk about it how there is need for holistic approach. So that is all for question number 2. Let's move to question number 3. Question number 3 is current affair based question. Let's read the question together. Consultancy firms serve as indispensable navigators in the complex waters of government decision making, blending expertise with innovation to start a course that optimizes outcome for public good. In light of the statement, highlight the benefits of consultancy firm in public policy making and challenges posed by them. Recently, we have witnessed that how government is making sure and engaging consultancy firms for policy making as well as implementing the policy. But there are certain kind of issues with the same along with the benefits. We can talk about that how there are certain expertise that consultancy firm bring in. You can see that how RBI is using AI for regulatory supervision and it is awarding contract to a certain consultancy firms to ensure its implementation. But however, there are certain issues with the same where we have seen that they must be regulated and they must ensure not to turn to global consultancy agencies. So this is the kind of these are the kind of points that you can inculcate in the introduction where you can talk about that how consultancy firm they are providing a paradigm shift with respect to the governance in the nation, but they are also coupled with certain challenges. In the heading 1, you can start with certain benefits of the consultancy firm. Over here, you can list down the benefits along with certain proof points, such as first, you can talk about the expertise and specialized knowledge as we saw in the recent context part where we saw that RBI is using certain kind of technology for regulatory supervision and it is using a specific consultancy firm for the same over here because of the specific expertise and specialized knowledge. Example, we have seen that how McKinsey and companies assistance with respect to implementation of GST for the Indian government. Second, you can talk about how they also help with respect to the efficiency and timeliness. You can provide certain proof points such as EY is developing skill management program system for the ministry to ensure that there is proper efficiency and accountability side. The next is with respect to the capacity building where the consultancy firm are leveraging the expertise to ensure that the capacity of the stakeholder, not just of the government functionaries, but also other functionaries are augmented. The fourth is cost effective solution. Over here, we are talking about that how they ensure that there is certain transparency with respect to the implementation and thus cost effective solutions. And lastly, innovation and creativity. Over here, we are looking at certain kind of ideas which are out of box and which are not expected from traditional bureaucratic structures and political structures. So this is something like you can write for the benefits of consultancy firm. However, there are certain challenges as well, which will be your heading 2. In the challenges, you can talk about cost concerns. There have been reports that government has expended more than 500 million for with respect to the consultancy, and that kind of asymmetry can impact how the public money is utilized. The next is limited understanding of the local context. As we do understand that consultancy firm, they do not have the kind of understanding of local context. Over here, we are talking about the global consultancy that the government is referring to. Over here, we have seen that how they have certain kind of ideation with respect to the advices, but they sometimes mismatch with the local reality. Next is short-term focus. As those consultancy do not have the kind of accountability for the long term, they do not have kind of solutions which are long term in nature. And lastly, and the fourth one is dependency on external expertise. Over here, we are talking about that how government, instead of augmenting the capacity of the governance machinery, they are relying on external agents where they can have certain kind of dependency issues. And lastly is lack of accountability. Now those consultancy firms, they do not have specific accountability from the public, and thus they can misuse this aspect as well. So these are the kind of challenges that you can write for the heading 2 of this question. Now for this conclusion, you can give certain way heads. Over here, you can list few way heads in your answer. However, I'll be giving you a list of way ahead you can encompass in your conclusion, such as regulation for the consultancy engagement. Apart from that, transparency with respect to the onboarding process. Also curb rent seeking behavior. So there should be proper incentives with respect to the outcomes they are achieving. Next is mechanism to disclose value addition, so that we can understand what was the extra value that they added with respect to their consultancy and advices. Next is fostering accountability and public trust. Over here we are keeping certain kind of structures through which the consultancy firm can also be held accountable for the advices as well as the implementation that they are doing. Then inclusivity and accountability through stakeholder involvement. Over here we are talking about encouraging national as in local consultancy such as Samagra, Satwa, right? So instead of relying on global consultancy such as McKinsey or Bain, we are talking about that how can we rely on local consultancies as in Satwa and Samagra. Apart from that, we can utilize we can make sure there is utilization of surveys, forums and participation, so that we can understand what exactly is the impact of those consultancy. Then there is responsive policies and programs. Government policies and programs must itself be responsible in nature to ensure that they do not have to rely on consultancy firm at the first place. And next is maintain quality and effectiveness in the public service delivery. Thus, there should be proper transparency with respect to the quality and effectiveness of the public service delivery. So that is all for conclusion of the question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the introduction, you can cite the recent context. You can talk about that there is certain degree of dependency of government with respect to consultancy. You can also talk about certain advantages. You can talk about the benefits. Over here, you can list down the benefits and you can cite the same with certain proof points. Next, you can talk about the challenges. You can list down the challenges along with certain example for the same. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can give certain way ahead like points. So that is all for question number 3. You are writing for free answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. In this month, we are looking at GS1. We are writing 5 days a week. Every day, we are writing 2 questions on static subject and 1 question on current affairs. And you can see those questions at vajiramIS.com, and you can see the model answer along with the video discussion over here at YouTube channel. So keep writing and thank you so much.